The peak above Hong Kong's harbor wasn't built for views. In the early 1800s, it served as a lookout for pirate Zhang Baozai. While the Qing government's presence was minimal, an assistant magistrate from Kowloon visited only occasionally to collect taxes, Zhang's stronghold dominated. Fishing boats from southern China plied these routes, unaware that the highest ridge watched over them. Decades later, British traders would seek control of this island. But first, they would discover it was no barren rock. Hong Kong was never a barren rock. Before the British arrived, it was a living place, terraced fields, fishing villages, shrines and temples along the coast. Historian James Hayes wrote that farming was the island's principal occupation. The island had several villages of some size, hamlets, and a few larger coastal villages that served as market towns. A permanent boat population moved through its harbors. Fishing vessels from across southern China called here. The Qing government exercised thin authority. An assistant magistrate from Xianan County's Kowloon office visited only occasionally to collect land taxes and register boats. Local headmen and village elders ran daily life. This was no empty prize waiting for a colonial flag. It was a settled maritime community, and it sat at the center of a story that reached far beyond its shores. Before any British flag ever flew over Hong Kong Island, its highest peak belonged to someone else entirely. Zhang Baozai, sometimes rendered Chang Baozai in older sources, made the island his stronghold in the early 1800s. He used the summit as a lookout, scanning the waters below for the ships his fleet would target. The island's rugged coastline offered sheltered coves where his junks could conceal themselves. The details we have are thin. We do not know how many vessels he commanded, how many raids he mounted, or what tribute he exacted. The record is sparse, and that is the honest limit of what we can say. But we know the island was no empty rock. Fishing boats from across southern China plied its harbors. The Qing government's presence was thin. An assistant magistrate from Kowloon drifted in occasionally to collect land taxes and register fishing vessels. On the ground, local headmen and village elders ran daily life. That strategic position, the watching peak, the sheltered harbor, the routes connecting it to Canton and beyond, would not go unnoticed. Decades later, a British superintendent would look at those same waters and see an opportunity. Look at the map of southern China. The waters around Hong Kong Island weren't empty. They were arteries. Fishing vessels from across southern China, junks and smaller craft, plied these waters, following routes that stretched along the coast. The harbors welcomed them. The coastal waters teemed with a permanent boat population moving between villages and market towns. The island sat at the crossroads of these routes, a natural stopping point, a sheltered anchorage, a place where the sea met the land. After 1821, when Canton authorities drove the illegal opium trade from Whampoa, British traders followed those same routes. They set up shop on several coastal islands, including Hong Kong. They were already here, already operating, already seeing what the waters could offer. Control of these waters meant control of China's trade routes. Whoever held Hong Kong Island held the keys to the passage between Canton and the open sea. What happened next would decide whether those waters belonged to farmers and fishermen or to an empire. The idea of a British base on the China coast had been discussed since at least 1815, when an East India Company official in Canton called for a station as close to Beijing as possible. The proposal gained traction as free traders lobbied for expanded access to Chinese markets. This was not state policy yet, it was ambition, repeated, circling back. The logic was practical, not imperial. The company's traders in Canton needed a reliable resupply point, a place to anchor, refuel, and rest before pushing north toward the Chinese capital. The proposal went nowhere. The Qing court had no intention of welcoming a permanent British foothold near its capital. The East India Company held its monopoly. No one was ready to act. But the idea did not disappear. After 1821, when Canton authorities drove the illegal opium trade from Whampoa, British traders followed those same routes and set up shop on coastal islands, some within sight of Hong Kong. They were already living here, already using these waters, already proving the island's strategic value through daily practice rather than imperial decree. The 1815 proposal had been one man's suggestion. But by the time Lord Napier arrived in 1834, that suggestion had accumulated enough weight to become policy. Not yet, not formally. But close. The map was already drawn. The question was who would claim it. August 1834. Lord Napier arrived in Canton as Britain's new Superintendent of Trade, sent to supervise commerce after the East India Company lost its monopoly over British trade with China. He was determined to deal directly with Qing officials as diplomatic equals, breaking with the old system of intermediaries and translators. He carried a bold proposal: a small British force should take possession of Hong Kong Island, securing European trading rights on the China coast. James Matheson, head of Jardine Matheson, had been urging the government for years. Now, with the monopoly gone, the moment seemed ripe. Napier insisted. The Qing officials refused. He was held hostage in the Canton factories until he agreed to leave China. He died shortly afterward from malaria. The mission was a disaster. But his proposal survived him. The island he had named as a target remained unclaimed, but the idea of claiming it had taken root. Seven years after Napier's failure, Britain moved. In 1841, they claimed Hong Kong Island not as a sudden act of conquest, but as the outcome of a long crusade by British free traders determined to open China's markets. James Matheson, head of Jardine Matheson, had urged the government to establish a base for protecting British trading interests in southern China. The merchants got what they wanted. They took an island no longer empty, no longer unknown, an island whose peak had watched over these waters long before any British flag flew. The pirate Lookout's Island had become an empire's foothold. And the story of how it happened, and what was lost in the telling, is the story of Hong Kong itself. Before the British flag ever touched Hong Kong, this island had a king. Zhang Baozai, sometimes rendered Chang Baozai in older sources, ruled from the highest peak, scanning the waters below. We do not know his fleet size or what tribute he exacted. The record is thin. But the island was no empty rock. Fishing vessels from across southern China crowded these harbors. An assistant magistrate from Kowloon drifted in occasionally to collect taxes and register boats. The emperor's writ ran thin here, and the peak above the harbor watched over it all. When Britain finally claimed the island in 1841, they found what pirates and fishermen had always known: this was no barren rock. It was a contested maritime stronghold, and it had been long before any empire arrived. The story they told about discovering an empty island was the story they needed, not the story that was true. The peak above Hong Kong's harbor wasn't built for views. In the early 1800s, it belonged to a pirate. By 1841, it belonged to an empire. The story of how that happened, and what was lost in the telling, is the story of Hong Kong itself. We started with a name and a chronology: Zhang Baozai, early 1800s, Hong Kong Island. What we found was an island that was never empty, never barren, and never waiting for anyone to claim it. That is the story the records preserve, even when the details do not. Next time, how a Chinese civil war saved the colony the pirates built.